Hello and welcome to my channel Florist Patch Painting. I'm Sandrine Moji, and in this series of videos I am showing you how I paint a sunflower. This is the fourth and last part, and in this part we're going to look at how to do detail with dry brush and a very fine paintbrush. This is where we stopped at the end of video 3, with all the big washes done, most of the colour is on there, and now we have to bring it all together with some precise detail that will really bring out the botanical side of the painting. And we are going to start with the centre. There is an area here in the very center of the middle part where all the little florets lie in a different direction from the rest of that big circle. There's a few little bits upright in the center, the very center of it, and then around that they all sort of lie down pointed towards that little bit, so it's like a little crown pointing towards the middle. And there's several layers of these just going round in this direction, a bit like a little sun. And they're all lying on top of each other. So you're with a tiny brush, this is a 3-0 brush, you just basically paint them one by one. And you overlap them, and you also have to take care behind the big petals like this that overlap them, because that very dark colour beneath the yellow is going to really bring out the yellow of the sunflower, and also it's going to make that big petal come forward a lot. So you need a really neat edge there, because obviously if some of the black goes on the petal then it doesn't make sense anymore, and the feeling of depth would be ruined, because you're going to have some of the dark center on top of the petal, which should be in front of you. So you keep going round, pointing towards that center with your little florets, and obviously if you looked at it flat on, it would be a circle, but because of the perspective it becomes an oval. Now the other kind of florets are the ones which are around the edge, and they're no longer pointing towards the very center of the flower, they're actually standing up in front of the petals. So again, with my tiny 3-0 brush, I'm painting all these with a little, that sort of little blob at the top, and then a little stem on them, each individual little floret. And I'm starting by painting them all along the edge, overlapping the petals there at the back. And once I've done the first row all over the edge, I will start overlapping them and working towards the other set of florets which I've painted already. So let's accelerate now, because it might be a little boring to watch me paint every single little one in real time, because it's not difficult to do, but it takes quite a while to do all of them, because there's hundreds of them. And while I do this at 20 speed, let's talk about colour. This is a very dark mix, quite a thick mix, it's not very watery, but again I keep to my principle of not using black and not using ready-made greys, because all the ready-made greys contain one or the other of the black pigments in them mixed with another colour. So the result of using a ready-made grey is exactly the same as mixing black on your own palette. So I mix my own grey with my 3 primary colours, and I've actually used the same colours as I've used for my shadow. So that's the Perylene Violet mixed with the Winsor blue red shade. That makes beautiful velvety dark violet, and I've neutralized that with the new Gamboge. So I've got my 3 primary colour, my blue Winsor blue red shade, my red Perylene Violet, and my yellow new Gamboge, and I'm mixing them you can see it's quite thick because I don't want to have to do several layers of this, because one layer it takes enough time, and also the more you go over something, the more you lose the precision of it. You've got a lot more precision in a single stroke than you do with overlapping little strokes in the same place. So on the palette, that's quite a sort of a creamy mix, and because my paintbrush is very small, it's a 3-0, and because it's a synthetic, I only use synthetic brushes, so it doesn't carry that much paint. So I need to reload quite often. You can see between I do maybe 3 or 4 of them, and then I need to go back to the palette to reload, and then I do a few more. And that way I'm sure that I've got enough paint to make them thick enough and dark enough that I won't have to go over again. So you can see here I'm overlapping them, and by overlapping them while painting them one by one, that leaves little gaps in there, which is good because it adds to the natural feeling of it. While a sunflower's got a very, very dark center, there's also little bits in there that are hit by the light, which look a bit lighter, and also little gaps where things overlap but don't quite completely fill the space. Now let's pay attention to that hairy stem. Again, there is not really any other way of doing it apart from just painting every single little hair one by one with your tiny brush. Again, it takes a little bit of time, but it's really not very difficult. Just observe your stem very well, see the direction of the hairs. Are they all going in the same direction? Are some going to the left, to the right, some upwards, some downwards? The pilosity on some of these stems and some of the leaves as well sometimes is not always the same pattern. There's always a pattern to it, but it's not always the same. So make sure you observe well. And also make sure you have the right color, because the color can differ as well from the color you've used in your foliage. Now for this sunflower, the hairs were green, and the green was very similar to the foliage and the color of the stem. So I used the same mix, which is a base for the green mix, which is my Royal Talens Rembrandt sap green, which is still my favorite sap green. And I made it a bit darker with the Winsor blue red shade, and I also darkened it a little bit further and made it a bit more neutral as well, with a tiny touch of Perylene Violet in it. That makes it a little bit less bright, a bit less saturated, a bit more neutral, and a bit closer to the colour of the sunflower. Now all the hairs are the same colour, but depending on if they're in the light or if they're in the shadows, obviously it's exactly like the same as the foliage, or it's exactly the same as the stem. Your little hairs are going to be affected by light and dark. So on the dark side they might look darker, and in the light they will be a little bit lighter. But if you paint your light hairs on the light side with a very light green, and you paint your dark ones on the dark side with a very dark green, they're not going to show at all. Fortunately, some of the dark hairs on the dark side, because they stand proud of the stem, they still catch the light, and then they look lighter than the stem beneath. So on the dark side, you can do a mix of very dark little hairs, and certainly the ones that overlap the edge of the stem, the ones that are going to be cut to white to the edge of the stem, should be very dark, but a few of them will be lighter, and that will show the hairs a lot better because they will be light against dark. And this is one of the very rare occasions when I would actually use white paint, because these little hairs are just too fine to be masked properly. You know, the masking fluid would just make the lines too thick for them. And also there would be so much masking fluid in it because the stem is covered in hairs that you wouldn't have any room to paint the stem at all. So it's better to paint the stem first and then to deal with the hairs as details at the end of it with your dry brush. So I used a white. If you're going to use a white, you might as well go for the whitest and the most opaque of the whites. It's still watercolour, not a gouache. I still use a watercolour, but it's titanium white, and that is the whitest white, and it's very opaque, so you won't need to do 100 layers of it to paint your white hairs over the dark green. Make sure that you don't make it too watery, because if it's too watery, it's just going to disappear into the green and it's not going to be sharp enough. If it's too thick, it might not be a smooth line, so you need a sort of creamy consistency, which is liquid enough to cover in a stroke, but not liquid enough that it just disappears into nothing. So over the dark side, I will do a few light hairs just to do a few little highlights to show the texture. And on the light side, I will also do a few dark ones, because the hairs all overlap each other, sometimes some cast a shadow on some ones beneath, and then some of them look darker. So it's quite good, it's quite lucky really, because that means that you can have some dark hairs on the light side, which will then show the furry side of your sunflower. All the ones that are cut to white, even on the light side, they're definitely painted dark, because if you paint something white cut to white, it's not going to show. So all the ones on the left side of my stem there, that overlap the edge of the stem to the white paper, are going to be dark. Make sure you paint enough of them. There's thousands of them, but they're really worth doing, and they're worth doing well, because it will add a lot of life to your painting. And we're coming to the end of this video. That was the fourth part, painting the detail with a dry brush, and this is what the painting looks like at the end. So I hope you enjoyed the series, and I will see you soon with some more tutorials and more demonstrations and more answering of your questions and florist patch painting. Thank you, happy painting, bye!